Hi, welcome to Café with Cavanha. Today we have Stuart Broadley. He is EIC CEO. Welcome, Stuart. Good afternoon.
Very nice to meet you. How are you?
Good, excellent. Good to meet you too. Could you please explain us a little bit more about EIC?
It's not an easy word to say. So, yes, thank you. I would like to. So, EIC is, it stands for Energy Industries Council. It's a 75-year-old trade association in the UK, the largest trade association in the UK.
Is that private?
It's owned by our members, actually, so it is private, and it's a not-for-profit. Since 1943, 75 years, we have been, not me, not 75 years, but the EIC has been helping companies to really do two things. These would normally be companies in the energy business, so oil and gas and power, nuclear, renewable, and they either want to diversify, so maybe move from oil and gas into renewable or from nuclear into maybe decommissioning oil and gas or something. And secondly, it's to export. So companies to grow within the UK, but ultimately then to grow around the world. And this is what we are passionate about. And we have 650 companies that are British suppliers that are members.
And which countries do you work?
Right, so we, since 1943, actually work all around the world. It goes right back to the beginning. The purpose of what we do is to take companies out of their original startup, which is normally some part of the UK. And let's say you've got a company which is maybe a 30-person SME, or maybe you've got a company that is a 50,000-person contractor. Still, both companies need to grow. And both companies need to find opportunities around the world in the energy sector. And we help them to grow, and we help them to find those opportunities.
Good. And tell me, oil and gas compared to other energies you take care, is how much in terms of percent?
Of what we do, I think now it's about 60% oil and gas and 40% power. And power is all types of power, conventional power, nuclear power, renewable power. And so we know this because we have a lot of data. So we're becoming, if you like, a data organization, a digital organization, I guess you could say, which is, of course, very common for many businesses today. And what I mean by that is that the information that we collect to help companies choose where around the world they should be doing business in the energy market now is provided in a series of databases, which only the members can get. And these databases have a lot of information about where is the best business in the world.
When you say business, you are not mentioning oil and gas companies, but suppliers for oil and gas companies, or not?
Yeah, so our members are normally suppliers to energy customers
in general,
anywhere in the world. Oil and gas operators, developers for an offshore wind farm, owners of a nuclear power station, and so on. And yes, but they're normally supply chain companies, and they can be, as I say, very small companies, maybe even a startup company.
Technologies.
Just a technology company, or it doesn't have to be. It could be a recruitment company, a legal company, right the way up to the very biggest global manufacturers like, say, Siemens and OEM and GE, the biggest contractors like Wood and Technip and so on. These are the sort of companies that still, in the end, need to know where are the opportunities around the world.
Some of them are just installed in Brazil, and some are trying to come to Brazil.
So, if we talk about Brazil then, I think for nearly the whole time we have been working to help companies, Brazil has been one of the markets that we have focused on. So why do we focus on Brazil? Because I know you want to know that, right? Brazil, for a start, is a major user of energy and a major producer of energy. And those are the two typical requirements for why a supply chain company would choose to come to any market in the world. So Brazil has a lot of aspects to its energy requirements, both production and consumption, that are similar to what British suppliers would do in the UK sector in the North Sea. So these are often mature oil and gas fields. often with a mix of shallow and deep water, a mix of oil and gas, often challenging operating environments. And a lot of the training that goes into whether it's extending life, whether it's building new facilities, whether it's engineering work, whether it's operation and maintenance, is common. And a lot of the engineers actually maybe were trained in Brazil and now work elsewhere in the world working with British companies, or maybe were trained in the UK and then come to Brazil. So there's a lot of common heritage and culture between our two nations. I think also actually the two governments support each other and they share information. And in fact, that's why I'm in Rio today, is because the British government is here in partnership with a research arm of Oxford University to work with many British and Brazilian companies, all here for 2 days, to look at the gas market.
Yeah.
And this is an example of where often we find Brazilian and British companies and governments work very well together. They trust each other and they share a lot of information. So business moves to relationships, and relationships, when you spend enough time together, become business friendships.
Yes.
And that trust is one of the things we see here between British and Brazilian companies.
Both sides, from UK to Brazil and from Brazil to UK?
Correct.
So you
correct.
did
Both
some-
sides,
yeah,
yes,
yeah.
correct.
That's very important.
Yeah.
Tell me about, I saw something in the EIC report called Survive and something. Can you explain
Survive and thrive. So perhaps I should explain a little bit first about me. So when I came into EIC as CEO 2.5 years ago, I'd spent a lot of time in the energy world, but not inside a not-for-profit. I was working in oil and gas, and then I was working in renewable, and I was working in downstream technology. So I had a lot of experience, but not working in the not-for-profit sector. So I needed to learn how to do this job. So I did what came naturally to me, and I just spent 3 months talking to as many of our member companies as I could.
Trying to understand the behavior of this.
Yeah, what do they want? What am I here to do?
Yeah.
That's when I did that. This was 2.5 years ago, so this was 2016, right in the middle of the oil downturn, really the crisis. So, of course, for many companies, what we normally offered to them was no longer necessarily what they wanted. And so, what is normal for us? We do a lot of events. Okay, we bring together British supply chain companies with customers.
Like networking.
Like networking and getting to meet their customers so that they can then do business with them. Okay, so we did a lot of that. We do UK pavilions, where we actually, if it's OTC or if it's ADIPEC, Rio Oil and Gas, we run the British pavilion. So we do a lot of that, again, to bring British companies to Brazil to meet customers. And we have a lot of databases to provide the opportunities. This is what we did, what we still do. But in a downturn, what I learned was that's not enough.
Not enough.
That normal, providing members, suppliers with data and the opportunity to meet customers is not enough.
They expect
and that's
more
what I
than that.
learned. Well, they expect more, but actually it's just that in a downturn, companies have to take a series of actions which are different from a good market. And the truth is that we've always in the past described ourselves as a trade association that is here to help companies export. And we kind of had a very narrow definition of it. We're here to help companies export. And so I'm talked with actually about 300 supply chain companies over those first few months. And I kept hearing a message which didn't match with what actually we were doing. And the message was, export is hard.
Export is hard.
Export is hard.
For everywhere or specifically for Brazil?
So everywhere. And so, okay, that was then I realized, okay, so we like to think we do exports, and we work with a British government to help supply chain companies do exports. But actually, that's not enough anymore, because those companies in a downturn have to do different things to survive and maybe thrive. So if you like, to actually do well because of or in spite of a downturn. So this was the start of me realizing, okay, my job is not going to be easy, but also maybe I understand now what I have to do. So then I took those basic early discussions into a more formal interview process, and I wrote a report by interviewing a lot of companies, which I called then a Survive and Thrive report. And this was exactly that. What do companies do in a downturn to survive and thrive? Many companies did not want to be interviewed because maybe they didn't feel ready to share their story, but also many companies felt, okay, this is a chance to share a story at a time when actually for many companies they were not telling their story. And that's one of the other things I learned. In a downturn, supply chain companies don't tell their story. They feel like they don't have the money, or they don't have the resource, or their customer won't let them, or they just don't know yet how to say, we've got a new story to tell. So I learned, okay, export is hard, they don't know how to tell their story, but I also learned many other things. And shall I carry on and explain some of the other things I learned? Okay, what I learned is the best strategy for a company in a downturn, a supply chain company, where I've said the hardest strategy is export, the best, the easiest, the fastest strategy to win business, to get that business to turn to profit quickly, is actually innovation.
Innovation is the key word for this.
Innovation is a key word.
And what do you mean as innovation?
Right. So innovation actually is a broad topic. It can be as simple as a business, big or small, innovates its own strategy. It says, what I've always done in a downturn doesn't work anymore. My customer doesn't want what they always used to want from
you. You mean a market strategy in this
case?
Is,
yeah, but it can be a customer, it can be a market changes. But so if you can imagine, you're a supplier, and in a normal market you have a brochure, and in the brochure it lists everything you do with a price list. Sounds easy, right? Yeah. In a crisis, when you talk to your customer, of course they say, yeah, your price list is not, we can't afford that, and actually I don't want most of the things that you have in your brochure anymore. So one of the first things that innovation means is throw away your brochure.
Wow.
And you actually instead have to change it with listening. So brochure kind of means I already think I know what you as a customer want, and I'm going to offer you my services because that's what you want already, yes? And here's the price.
So tailor-made strategy.
Tailor-made. If you're in a downturn, what I found is actually most customers aren't really interested in a brochure with price list. Yeah. They want a relationship which is built on trust, so that then they will tell that supplier their biggest problem. And they're not going to tell a supplier their biggest problem if they don't trust you. So there's this time and visits that's required to build the trust.
A collaborative process to understand the needs they have.
And normally going higher up the hierarchy of the customer, so that you actually meet the real decision makers, the responsible executives. And then they will start to talk, if they trust you, about actually these are the real problems we have. And those problems will be different from in the good markets. In a downturn, there are very different problems. And once they start sharing those, then the suppliers that have found how to survive and thrive, then they innovate in almost any way they can. Different service, different products, of course, different pricing, more collaboration, new technology. If they can't make the technology, then they collaborate to bring in the technology. Digital, of course, now is everywhere, or at least everybody talks about digital, but already at last, digital is becoming a reality. And this is one of the things that customers also want, is to move from a discussion about digital to actually please deliver real digital solutions, proven solutions. So innovation is many things, but in the end, the heart of it is throw away your brochure if you're a supplier and build trust with your key customers. So you can't afford now too many customers. You have to focus on a few key customers. Maybe you retrench on a few key customers, and then you listen carefully. And then you build a new set of products and services just for them. And it may be what you give to that key customer, you then talk to the next key customer, and it's different again.
Yeah, totally different.
That's innovation.
And is it include maybe let's see, partnership with companies in the target country? I mean, Brazilian companies with UK companies. You can see this opportunity too.
So part of innovation and survival is normally some kind of collaboration anyway, but particularly for a country like Brazil, collaboration is critical.
Critical, yeah.
Our mindset almost mandatory, I would say. A little bit to do with how to do business is it's normal to have a partner here anyway, a local partner, a partner that understands the culture, the language, how to do business, the taxes. But also, so remember, now we go back to the topic of where innovation is the easiest thing to do, export is the hardest thing to do. And I have statistics. So more than 70% of companies, British supply chain companies, in a downturn, innovate. Less than 20% export. Now, that statistic is, in a downturn, what do companies like to invest in order to start growing again? They like to invest in innovation with their key customers. They don't like to invest in exports. Only 20% invest in a downturn in exports. Why? Why? Because it takes normally 3 years to go to a new country that you've never done business in before, like Brazil, build the trust first, and then understand what's needed. Find the right partner, select the right partner, build the trust with the partner. Then you've got a customer and you've got a partner. Then you do the investments. You get a facility, get the inventory and the tools, and eventually do some work, and then eventually get paid. For a new market like Brazil, for a British supplier, it's 3 years. Whereas, if you say, I'm a British supplier and I'm in trouble in a downturn, I'm going to focus on my best British customer, that could normally lead to business in less than 1 year. That's kind of the practical outcome of a downturn. So it comes back to, how do we get more British companies to export at a time when they see it as the hardest strategy? And that's the key. So that's what I've learned about my job now. So my job is not an easy job of just tell companies, we will help you export. Actually, my job is to help companies learn why exports is still a good thing. And then give them tools. Give them tools and support to do that, but also I have to help them innovate. Because that's actually what so many of them are doing.
Sure. Does it mean that they are becoming global companies in terms of supply chain concept? Or local companies with very strong competence to export only?
Right. That's a question mainly about Brazil, I think, but actually it applies to many countries that British suppliers want to work in around the world. Mm-hmm. So typically, you have to become you have to get a local partner or invest fully locally to get significant business in Brazil and in many other markets around the world. So really the answer to your question is, how do we bring British companies to Brazil?
Yeah.
Firstly, we have to give them some early information so that they get excited by the market opportunity. Mm-hmm. That's our database. So our database shows them, look at all the projects in oil and gas and in decommissioning and in offshore wind and so on in Brazil. So, okay, hopefully the supply company then says, okay, yes, Brazil looks good. Then we have to work with the Chamber of Commerce and the British government and the embassy here to help them meet the right partner, because they need a local partner. And all sorts of different partner options. So the local British government offices here are really good, and they're really excellent at knowing how the Brazilian culture works, how the Brazilian industry is structured, how the taxes work. So that helps British companies quickly get the advice they need. Mm-hmm. Then we help them to meet the customers, the energy customers, whether it's Petrobras or whether it's Shell or whether Equinor, but also whether it's contractors like Wood. So we know these companies, and so we help them to meet those businesses. And then finally, when they say, okay, we are ready, we now want to do business, then we have an office here in Rio. And why do we have an office in Rio? So they can come here
and support
at
them.
Low cost and start. And then they get to know and they use their partner, but also they don't need to invest in their own big facility first. They can just come in our office. We call that a launch pad. So it's like a a really low-cost, fast way to start doing business here. And then, of course, they quickly start winning business, hopefully. And then a big success for us is when they say, okay, we move out of the EIC office into a full office somewhere in Brazil. That's the process. And you see, it takes time, right? But it starts with, we have to give them the data so that they understand the Brazil market. And that's difficult, right? Not many organizations understand the Brazil market in a lot of detail. And if there's something that maybe the Brazil government could help with, it would be to work with the British government to continue to make it clear what is the opportunity, and then also to make it more efficient, less confusing to know how to start doing business in Brazil. Things like taxes and regulations. Nice. It can be a bit confusing.
That's the question I have for you. What are the three main risks you see in Brazil to invest?
Okay, so I'm going to answer that from the point of view of a supply chain company wanting to invest in Brazil. Exactly. So first risk is, do they pick the right partner? Because I think for many companies, when they go anywhere in the world, they want a partner to help them with language and culture and relationships. And yet, how do they, if they've never been there before, how do they choose the partner?
Yeah. The history, the problems.
Yeah, but they don't know the companies. So that's why actually the Brazilian and the British government offices locally in Brazil are important, because they can help a company coming in with that trust that comes from working with the government to say, we give you 5 partners that we think you should talk to, pick one, we recommend them. That's the first risk. Mm-hmm. So if that goes wrong, then the business won't happen. Mm-hmm. The second risk is that they don't pick a winner. So a winner is the right customer with the right opportunity. Mm-hmm. So even if they have a great partner, if they then pick a customer or a project that actually they were never going to win, and yet they didn't know that, but somebody could have told them, but somebody didn't tell them, then they've wasted a year, they've wasted 2 years, 3 years, and then they probably give up. So targeting the right project is just as important as targeting the right partner. And then the third risk is what appears to be, when a company comes into Brazil, a confusing and expensive process of doing business. Taxes, regulations, bureaucracy, and also politics. Politics, of course. So all of these things are kind of the third problem that Brazil faces when they're trying to encourage investment. Is it can look a bit, if you like, scary. But if we can solve the first two, find a good partner quickly, and we can find a good opportunity quickly, right. The third one, they will normally accept that risk.
Survive with that.
Correct.
Tell me about the perception UK companies have in terms of oil prices and the UK government. How do you see this in the future?
Okay, so firstly I would say that EIC is not officially a predictor of oil price. So what I give you now is my personal opinion. Yeah. So I have one statistic that I can give you that allows me to feel that my personal opinion has some merit. So we are lucky in the EIC to have a great relationship with the British government and the Department of International Trade particularly. And as part of that relationship, we run the UK pavilions at conferences around the world. And one of those big pavilions is OTC in Houston. It runs every year, and it's one of our biggest pavilions, and we have maybe 60 British businesses. Very big, very interesting. It is very big. Maybe 60 British businesses book into that pavilion every year. So in 2018, the year we've just run, it took us, in 2017, when we were booking companies to come into the pavilion, it took us 6 months to sell out, to get all 60 companies to book into the pavilion, 6 months. We have just now, last month, opened bookings for the 2019 OTC UK Pavilion, and it took 8 days to sell out.
That the expectation is very high.
So if a measure is confidence of the supply chain, and that confidence probably comes, of course, from them seeing opportunity, then definitely the market is improving. Now, that's not a direct measure of oil price, but of course there is a link oil price to then operators and their sentiment, down to contractors, and from contractors to the large range of supply chain companies who then really do a lot of the business. And so I think that's one signal that the market is improving. My personal view on oil price is that this $70 range we are in is going to be a stable range for the next
10 years. 10 years.
Not 10 years.
5 years.
Maybe 10 months. But that's important, actually.
Yeah, 10 months.
10 months. Right now is important because we now come to a budget cycle for 2019 for operators and contractors. And if it stays stable through the whole of that budget cycle, so then we come to January, February next year, it's still in the $70 range, I think then budgets will be higher for spend next year.
70 is a good number to
70,
make projects viable.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. And it's not just because it's a good number, but also because in the downturn, operators and supply chain have taken out a lot of cost from their design work on new projects, but also their own cost infrastructure. So actually, at $70, almost all projects can now go ahead.
Excellent.
So why don't they all go ahead now? Because they're waiting to see if it's a stable oil price. So that's why I think there's a good chance that the market will show an improvement because the budgets go up a bit next year. Still be a bit of caution. Okay, now, if the oil price stays in the 70 range for another year, then I think actually we are at risk of then going into a bit of a cycle again. Why do I think we might be at risk of a cycle? Why do I think the prices might stay high, maybe even go up to $80? It's not just because of the commodity aspects of the oil price. It's also because of the labor shortages for projects.
Oh, yes.
So over the last 4 years of the crisis, a lot of the skilled workforce has exited the oil and gas industry. They can't afford to wait for jobs, so they've gone into different jobs, or they've retired saying, I earned enough money, thank you. So now as the industry is going to start going again, and this maybe then will be a 5-year gap, they will not be able to recruit all the people back that they had 5 years ago.
It's not so simple to recruit people, young people.
It's not so simple because young people now, because of changes in society and changes in their beliefs, perhaps they also have questions about do they want to go to oil and gas? Maybe they want to go into renewables, or maybe they want to go into other digital applications.
Yeah, that's right.
So you have a problem on both sides. You have the higher age demographic of people that are saying, I retire. And then you have the younger age demographic who are saying, maybe now oil and gas is not where I want to go. So I therefore believe, potentially, that we will get projects next year and the year after that cannot go ahead. Not that they're expensive, but they just can't go ahead because they cannot get the people. And I think then there's a chance that those operators will have to declare publicly, we can't get the people. That'll then create an oil price further increase. So this is my personal opinion. Let's see. I'm certainly no economist, but that from a supply chain perspective, which is perhaps what I am now becoming a specialist in, it's absolutely true that the skills available now in oil and gas are less. The quantity of people in that sector has reduced significantly from 4 years ago. Significantly.
Are you an engineer or an economist?
Yes, I'm an engineer. Yes.
That's great.
Not an economist.
All the same.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, Stuart, I would like to thank you for this nice talking.
Yeah.
And it was a pleasure to meet you and to have this cafe with you.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure as well. Very nice to meet you.
Meet you too.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cavanha.café with Brazil Energia Petróleo and Ecoa PUC Rio. Thank you very much.